Alex, so welcome back to another video. Today I am bringing you a dedicated series review of the Raven's Shadow trilogy by Anthony Ryan. The Raven's Shadow trilogy is a dark epic fantasy series that consists of Bloodsong, Tower Lord, and Queen of Fire. In this series we are following Valen, who is a member of the Sixth Order. The Sixth Order is a guild of assassins that are contracted by the Emperor to protect the realm and the faith. And we are following Valen in two timelines. One when he is the newest recruit to the Sixth Order, and one many years in the future where he is known as the Hope Killer. Valen's story is told one of the timelines in third person omniscient, and the other is from the perspective of a bard who is talking to Valen to try and chronicle his life. And I really loved the dual timeline narrative. I love the framing of it. I love the way that we are constantly anticipating when the two timelines are going to converge. And this book I ended up giving 5 stars. I thought it was a fantastic assassin story. I think it did a really good job of actually having the assassin be an assassin. Looking at you, Fitz. I love you to pieces, but assassin. And then I also really appreciated the fact that he is someone who has joined this order. He hasn't joined this order voluntarily, but likewise he is not someone who undergoing their brutal training regime in a way that's like, why would you do this to me? He is someone who understands the training regime. He is someone who kind of gets on with it. He is someone who is learning. So while I think that there was a really good assassin section in the past timeline, present timeline very much was a fascinating epic fantasy story. We have all of the epic scope of war and political machinations going on, and therefore we see the people that Valen has touched with his life. Like, you can see who he has worked with, people who know who he is and have either questions about the acts that have led him to be so despised, or they have complete understanding and therefore care for him. I really loved the society in here and the way that was constructed. It was typical epic fantasy, but done in a very specific way that I think worked really well for this narrative. And my only criticism really with this one, which wasn't much of a criticism actually in this first book, was that I did find that the side characters did feel very much like supporting characters. At no point did they feel like a fully fledged, fleshed out human being. They very much were there to support Valen. And while I think it worked for this story because we're focusing so much on Valen and Valen's life, I think that obviously I would have enjoyed it more if they had a bit more depth to them. But I think in the way that they related to Valen and the way that highlighted Valen and made you love Valen even more, it worked really well. Sadly, when it came to book 2, which is Tower Lord, I did feel like it took a brief step down, which I assumed was due to middle book syndrome. I just felt like Valen in this book felt very different to how he was in the first book. He felt a bit more aloof, and there wasn't a justification for the change in the first book. Obviously, between the two timelines, Valen has experienced so much. There is a big change in him from when he is a young man who is learning to someone who has seen the pits of humanity and someone who is now in a completely different position. You could see how he would have changed, but at the same time still very much felt like the same person, and at no point did I question that younger Valen and older Valen were the same person. In this one, I felt like Valen felt very different, but the events in between where book 1 ended and where this book goes don't warrant or justify such a huge change in character where he felt unrecognizable. And I felt like those changes were solely put in so that it would suit this narrative of this story. I did have hope that even though there were quite a few things in here that didn't feel like they were necessary, it's a very large book and there were lots of things in here that I'm like, I'm not sure what the point of this is. I assumed were the threads that were being opened to continue into book 3, and that we would then see change come back and that this was just middle book syndrome. So therefore, with that hope, I ended up giving this book 4 stars, but it is now a 3-star. And I will explain. Book 3 took yet another step down. So while I was reading book 3 and hoping that this would really make book 2 have been worth my while, that it would explain so many of the things that were introduced that I felt went nowhere, possibly even explain away, maybe not justify, but explain away the change in Valen's personality, and we would come back to the character that we know and love from book 1, I didn't feel like any of that happened. All I felt was that this took yet another step down, and it was as though the author had decided, oh yeah, I need to finish that series, and just came up with some extra action content and random threads that he could then quickly tie up so that it would feel like the series concluded. And I definitely did not recognize Valen at all by the end of it. He felt like a completely different character. When in book one, the only character I drew any attachment to was Valen because of the way the side characters were written. If you're then going to drastically change Valen, it's going to drastically change my enjoyment of the series. So sadly, this book ended up being a really low 3-star. I think it's only just gotten a 3-star instead of a 2.5, and I was very sad about it. While the series did definitely trail off, I did really love book one. So it's a weird one to recommend to people because I genuinely think that book one is a 5-star read. It was such a good book. When I was doing my ranking my series for 2024, I had no idea where to put this series because I can't rank it low. Book one's 5 stars, but I can't rank it high. Book 3 is barely 3 stars. So it was a very strange experience. And if you aren't someone who is like super completionist that needs every single thing wrapped up, I would recommend reading Bloodsong as a standalone. Granted, it's a series, so there are going to be loose threads and open veins, but I just still wouldn't recommend going into the sequels, especially if your biggest connection with the story, like for me, is with Valen, because he's not the same in the sequels for me personally. So a very odd experience, but still one that I am glad that I read, even if it is just that I'm glad I read the first book. It was definitely worth it. It was recommended to me by my friend Terry, who I'll leave his links down below. He has impeccable taste, mostly because he's also obsessed with Robin Hobb. And yeah, I read it in my Terry vlog, which I will leave up in the cards. I'm glad that I read book one, even if it meant that I also put up with books 2 and 3. But maybe you don't have to. Maybe I can deter you and make you only read book one and pretend it's a standalone with open threads. But that is all for this video. So let me know if you've read this series and your thoughts on it. Let me know based on my liking of this series if there is another series that you would recommend. But that is all from me for today. So thank you ever so much for watching, and I will hopefully catch you in another one soon. Bye.